Hello and welcome to Emulsion. In this tutorial, we're going to cover how to composite the film grain with your footage, how to loop the film grain, and how to make your footage look more film-like. So, to get started, let's start with compositing with your footage in Premiere, Final Cut Pro X, and After Effects. So once you've downloaded all the files and unzipped, you should have access to all of the different film grains in 8mm, 16mm, and 35mm. To composite in Premiere, let's go ahead and drag a film grain into our project. And I have a clip right here. This is actually in 4K. The grain is also in 4K, so I'm just going to drag it into the timeline. Now, if you're working with 1080p footage, you're going to want to go to the film layer and change this to 50%. Otherwise, if you're working in 4K, you can keep it at 100%. So once we have the film grain over our clip, we'll simply go to the Effects Controls panel, and under the Opacity tab, there's a blend mode, and you're going to change that to either Overlay or Soft Light. If you want a more powerful, punchy look, you'll go for the Overlay. If you want something a little bit more subtle, you'll go for the Soft Light. So I'll just hit Overlay here, and it composites with our footage. Now, you may notice that the playback is a little bit choppy. This is completely normal for compositing clips with the blend mode. So what you'll want to do is just go to Sequence and Render into Out. It'll render the footage and the playback will be smooth. Besides that, you can also change the opacity for the strength, and that is how you composite in Premiere. Let's move on to Final Cut Pro. Within Final Cut Pro, it's very similar. I have my clip in the timeline, and we'll drag the grain over on top of it. And with Final Cut Pro, it's by default, it'll scale the footage to the size of your canvas. So whether you're working with 1080p or 4K footage, it should scale the grain accordingly. So you don't really have to worry about that. Once the grain is over your footage, you'll go to the inspector window and you'll scroll all the way down to compositing. And under here, you'll find the blend mode, and same as before, you'll change this to either Overlay for a strong look or Soft Light for a more subtle look. So I'll just hit Overlay, and Final Cut will start rendering in the background, and we have our composited footage. Let's move on to After Effects. So in After Effects, I've imported my footage and my grain, and let's go ahead and just create a new composition with this footage. I'm going to drag the grain on top and make sure it's on top of your footage, and the blend mode column is right here. If you don't see it, you may have to toggle the switches, and we'll just hit this drop-down menu and select Overlay or Soft Light to composite. And that is how you composite in Premiere, Final Cut Pro, and After Effects. The clean grain overlays are loopable, so if you come across footage that's longer than 15 seconds, you can easily extend the grain to accommodate your footage. So in the timeline, I have a shot that's about a minute long, and I have my grain over it. I haven't changed the blend mode yet. We're going to save that for later. What we're going to do is we're just going to duplicate this a couple of times and make sure everything's aligned. And you can do this as many times as you want, and it'll loop seamlessly. Then you'll select all of your copies, right-click, and hit Nest, and we'll hit OK. Next, we want to single-click the layer to highlight. Then we'll go to the Effects Controls, and same as before, we'll change the blend mode. And now we have film grain that lasts about a minute, and you can extend this for as long as you want. In Final Cut, it's a very similar procedure. I have my clip that's about a minute long, and I've dragged my grain on top, and we're just going to select the grain, and while hitting Option, we'll click and drag to make a couple of copies, making sure everything's aligned, and then we'll select all of our copies and go to File, New, Compound Clip, and that'll create one single clip for our grain. which will highlight, go to the inspector panel, go to blend mode, and change to overlay or soft light. Within After Effects, there's actually no duplicating necessary. We can extend the grain by using a simple expression. So once you have your layers in the right place, you can select the grain layer, go to Layer, Time, Enable Time Remapping, and with the keyframes up, we're just going to hold Option or Alt if you're on Windows while clicking this little stopwatch. This will enable the expression in which you'll type loop out cycle, just making sure that the O is capitalized, there's parentheses and quotation marks. If the formatting is correct, you'll be able to click away, and that'll enable our expression in which we can hover over the right side and extend for as long as we want, and the grain will loop, and then we can go and change our blend mode. To get that film look, one of the key characteristics in color grading is to raise the black levels. That'll kind of give it a faded look, which is very reminiscent of film. So within Premiere, I like to use the Lumetri effect. It's a very powerful effect, and it also comes with a bunch of presets, which you can drag and drop and see kind of what looks good. But I'll just go for the default Lumetri. And within the creative side, they actually give you a faded film option, which you can add here. And of course, you can change all the color. Adding purple sometimes makes it look a lot like film stock. Giving it more saturation is also another key element. So just play around with it. Lumetri is definitely the way to go. You can also play around with LUTs. If you visit our freebie page, we actually have a free LUT collection, which some of them kind of give that retro film look. So make sure to check that out on RocketStock.com. But otherwise, just play around with grading, raise those blacks, and try to give it a little bit more punch with saturation and changing the color balance. That's all going to give you more of a film look. Let's move on to Final Cut Pro. Within Final Cut Pro, under the Effects window, you can add a color correction effect, in which case we can hit this little arrow here, and we can change the color, the saturation, the exposure. And what I like to do is go to the exposure and just kind of raise the blacks and crush those midtones, maybe raise the whites a little bit. But raising those blacks is really going to give it that faded film look. I like to boost the saturation a bit, particularly in the mids and the blacks. And then with the color tab, you can also change the color as well, just to give it more of that film look. So play around with it. Definitely raise the blacks and crush the midtones. Add a bit of saturation, play around with color. All of that is going to really sell the film look along with the grain. With the distortion, the workflow is very similar, except the distortion is not particularly loopable. It's meant for more short clips and maybe using it with titles and motion graphics. The workflow is the same. However, with this clip in particular, distortion, dirt and light leaks 16mm, instead of using overlay or soft light, you're actually going to use multiply. And this is going to make the white transparent while giving those scratches kind of the spotlight. So besides that, the other distortion clips, you're going to use overlay or soft light. Just with this particular clip, you're going to use multiply instead. So that is how you use Emulsion in Premiere, Final Cut, and After Effects. It's as simple as changing the blend mode, looping when necessary, and adding a bit of color grading. So I hope you enjoy this pack. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to contact us.